Sonic 06, one of the most notorious video games of all time. Disappointing, messy, shameful, sad, and cheap are just a handful of words that describe not only the state of my own life, but also the state of Sonic the Hedgehog's most infamous outing. But I'm not just going to mercilessly tear this game apart based on what everyone else says. I've always been a stickler for forming your own opinions through your own experience, rather than just going along with the crowd. I've only played Sonic 06 once, and that was a long time ago, so I don't really remember that much about it, and for that reason, I wanted to go back to it. I wanted to see if Sonic 06 is truly as bad as its reputation suggests. So I dug out my Xbox 360, booted up the game, and started playing. The game opens with a cutscene that feels very out of place in the world of Sonic. It's too human. I mean, look at Eggman. What the fuck did they do to him? When did Blaine Pokemon join the Sonic franchise? Get out of here. Bring back the real Eggman. As your brain is dealing with the confusion caused by watching this cutscene, the game takes the opportunity to plonk you in the middle of Soliana, the hub world of the game, and your first task is to go around town and talk to NPCs to search for information, then complete a side minigame to earn rings to buy a power-up. This is the first thing you do in this game. The first thing. This is their first impression. A minigame ring challenge. What kind of game opens with a side quest? We just saw Princess Elise get captured by Eggman, and we're fucking around with a completely irrelevant challenge? Why? Imagine if you started a new save file in Skyrim, you go through the intro sequence, Alduin descends into Helgen and destroys the place, but before you can set off on your quest to defeat him, the game forces you to do some bullshit flower-picking side quest before you can continue. This is a Sonic game, let me play the Sonic game. But be careful what you wish for, me from the past. The first stage proper is Wave Ocean, and I could not believe how instantly I noticed some of the issues this game has. The physics in this game are so off, it's almost like it's set on another planet. Hardly anything works the way it's supposed to. One of the things Sonic is known for is those automatic level segments, parts of the level that pretty much play themselves. They're usually some kind of configuration of springs, rails, and loops. They appear in most Sonic games, and they're used to transition from one part of the level to the next. It's usually impossible to get these automatic level segments wrong, since the game is essentially playing itself for you. Sometimes, in Sonic 06, they don't work, and I don't understand how that's possible. The game will throw you into these automatic segments, and sometimes they just kill you. I don't know why, but occasionally the game will just fling you out of the automatic segment, causing you to fall into the abyss. It might be because Sonic isn't aligned properly when he gets a speed boost, he might just miss a spring for whatever reason, it could be anything, but I just want to emphasize how bad that is. The game can't play itself in the sections where the game is meant to play itself. The game's physics are inconsistent at the best of times. Everything is janky, clunky, stiff, and just doesn't behave in the way you'd expect it to. The movement and momentum are unpredictable, you can stand on walls. In fact, the physics are so broken that at one point I attempted to abuse the physics and tried to leave the game. I just want to remind you that I noticed all this in the first level. I've just started playing the game and I've already got so much to tear apart. And I haven't even mentioned the forced speed section. Holy shit! This is one of the worst things I've ever experienced in a game. Sonic is forced to run at high speed through a bunch of obstacles, which sounds simple and like the sort of thing you'd think Sonic would be good at, but it's impossible. You have damn near no control over Sonic at all. You can hardly turn, you can't slow down, and jumping is not always helpful. And if you touch anything at all, you take damage, and are stuck in recovery for a few seconds, where you can't move or influence Sonic's direction at all, and will most of the time touch something else and die. Who thought that this would be okay? It's not the player's fault if they die, most of the time it's the game's fault for being shit. The Crisis City speed section is easily the worst one. There is so much shit you have to avoid that drops in out of nowhere. Cars and debris flying all over the place that are impossible to predict and avoid. And if you're hit even once, you're basically dead. I got about 4 game overs here, and I guarantee you, none of it was my fault. Fuck Crisis City. The levels generally aren't even designed that well. It feels like they lack proper structure and direction. It's not so bad with Sonic, but when you play as characters that have more versatile movement options like Tails and Knuckles, you start to notice it, because as Tails and Knuckles you can basically fly wherever you want, and the game doesn't always make it very clear where you're actually supposed to go. Tails and Knuckles don't even play very well either. Tails' flying is really jerky, and he has a pretty awful ring bomb attack, and Knuckles' climbing is extremely awkward as well. On top of that, the levels are just too long and too full of random crap. They're flooded with crates and enemies that clog up the place, and they take forever to get through. And most of the time you can just ignore all of them. There's usually nothing stopping you from just going around all the hazards. Sonic is a game about speed, but the levels are a slog. It's pretty bad. And for some reason they made it worse by stunning you if you run into walls. I don't know why they did this, but it annoyed me so much. If you're going above walking speed and run into a wall, Sonic will fall over and be stunned for a few seconds before you can continue. It's the most unnecessary mechanic ever, and it just slows down the experience even more. The only part of the game that I'd say is somewhat well designed are the bosses. They're simple, they make sense, they don't overstay their welcome, and they actually function. But don't you worry, the game gets even slower, because between the actual levels, you have to do a bunch of side challenges, and they're so much fun. My personal favourite is Who is the Captain? In this exciting side mission, you get to talk to a bunch of soldiers to try and figure out who the captain is, so they'll let you pass into the next level. The soldiers will try and trick you with cryptic messages, which makes it a really interesting puzzle. But the icing on the cake is when you find out that the captain you're looking for is actually the guy who gave you the fucking quest. What an absolute waste of everyone's time. And speaking of wasting time, the load times are atrocious. They might just be some of the worst I've ever seen. It is abysmal. I just can't believe how long they are. The side challenges and load times drag out the game to an unbelievable extent, and for proof you need look no further than the Trials of Soliana. The Trials of Soliana are 3 stupid, boring, and short side challenges sandwiched between a shit ton of loading screens, and it takes at least 10 minutes to get through. They're not remotely fun or interesting. It is mind-numbingly terrible. Dealing with the janky physics, questionable level design, tedious side challenges, long load times, and other miscellaneous bullshit took its toll on me. But after roughly 5 hours of hard work, I successfully reached the end, which means that I can, oh for fuck's sake! This game has 3 stories. Everything I just complained about happened in Sonic's story, which means I have to go through that nightmare 2 more times to reach the end of the game. But maybe it won't be so bad. Maybe these other stories will be an improvement. There's only one way to find out, so let's give Shadow's story a crack. As you'd expect, in this story the focus is on Shadow rather than Sonic, which is good because that blue arsehole left a bad taste in my mouth. Oh, that sounds bad. I haven't been eating... you know what, never mind. Right away, I noticed that Shadow actually plays pretty well. Definitely much better than Sonic. He feels smoother, he seems to adhere to the laws of physics a lot more, his homing attack feels more reliable, he just seems to be an overall improvement over Sonic, and playing as him has definitely been the most enjoyable part of the game so far. It's just a shame they had to go ahead and ruin it with vehicles. For some reason they decided to force Shadow into using vehicles. Forget trying to enjoy the actually decent gameplay, how about you take these 4 abominations instead? Because who would prefer having a good time as Shadow over struggling to move in a straight line in vehicles? Honestly, what the fuck were they thinking? These vehicles are so bad. The way they jerk about and slide around and don't actually go anywhere near where you want them to go is incredibly frustrating. And I swear every level has one, sometimes even 2. Why? I mean, look at this. Who thought this was okay? Even when a level is over, the vehicles will still be having a fit. But don't you worry, we also get to play as Rouge and Omega. If you're looking for more terrible gameplay, these 2 have got you covered. Rouge combines Tails' awful bomb attack and Knuckles' awkward gliding and climbing into a single character, which is just fantastic, gotta love that. And Omega is... I don't know what he is. His attacks don't really work, he's got this really awkward hover, and his acceleration is really slow. He adds pretty much nothing of value to the game. Rouge and Omega feel like cheap afterthoughts, and that's something I want to take the opportunity to touch on about this game. The cheapness of it. Everything about this game is so cheap. The way it looks is very bland, uninspired, and generic. The visual effects are pathetic, especially when Mephiles takes Shadow and Rouge through time. The characters lack their personalities and feel like husks of their former selves. All of the game's wonky physics reek of cheapness as well. There was even a point where they left in a failed take of a voice line.
Agent Shadow, E123 Omega. Omega has engaged Mephiles. Head to the Wave Ocean, head to Wave Ocean. Agent Shadow, E123 Omega has engaged Mephiles. Head to Wave Ocean immediately.
I'm kind of stunned it took me to the end of Shadow's story to realise the cheapness of this game. Probably because I was being bombarded with terrible gameplay and awful side challenges the whole time, so I was distracted and failed to notice all the peripheral bullshit. But we're still not done yet. We've got one story left. Silver's story. And after suffering through 2 dumpster fires already, I'm not sure I can handle a third, but I may as well bring this to the end. Silver's story is actually pretty good. Well, as far as this game goes, I mean. And I think the reasons for that boil down to the fact that the big issues that cause Sonic's and Shadow's gameplay to be so insufferable don't apply to Silver. Sonic's gameplay is garbage because of the inconsistent physics and botched movement. Shadow's gameplay is decent but ruined by an overabundance of shitty vehicles. Silver's gameplay is good because the game's fuckery doesn't actually get in the way. Silver plays very differently to Sonic and Shadow. Rather than speeding around, Silver goes at a much slower pace, and the core of his gameplay is his psychokinesis, which allows him to pick up and throw objects, levitate, and influence the environment around him. And it's actually fun. Unlike every other playable character so far, Silver's gameplay isn't ruined by the game's general incompetence. And they actually do some cool things with his psychokinesis. It can be used for level traversal, for combat, and even for solving puzzles. I'm gonna go ahead and say it, Silver is the best part of this game by far. His gameplay is fun, his gameplay functions properly, there are no stupid gimmicks, it's just a genuinely enjoyable experience. Silver's story does also feature other playable characters though. Blaze is one of the better playable characters in the game. She's pretty much Sonic with a double jump and less jank. And then you've got Amy, who is not one of the better playable characters in the game. She's pretty bad. Her hammer attack has no range and her double jump is worthless. She can also turn invisible for some reason. I don't know what the hell that's about. But neither Amy nor Blaze is playable for too long. The focus is on Silver, and that's good, because Silver is good. That's not to say that Silver's story is without flaw. It does still suffer from having the tedious side challenges and the fucking trials of Soliana again, fuck off! But they aren't as prevalent here as they are in the other stories. The lack of bullshit also gave me a chance to appreciate the game's music a bit more. It's pretty good. Not as good as other Sonic games, mind you, but still there's some quality songs in there. One thing I did notice that didn't quite hit me until playing Silver's story is that this game does a lot of blatant recycling. Each story reuses the same 9 levels, they're just arranged in different orders and feature different playable characters. The levels themselves are pretty much exactly the same. So really, once you've seen the levels in one story, you've seen them all. I mean, just look at this conveyor belt section from Radical Train.
Does this conveyor change direction? This conveyor belt changes direction. This conveyor belt changes direction. I better be careful.
See that? Exactly the same. Granted, not all the levels are one-to-one copies, but they are mostly just completely recycled, and that's a bit of a shame. Although, maybe that's a blessing in disguise, because it means I don't have to suffer through more levels. After being so unexpectedly positive about Silver's story, it would seem like Sonic 06 gets better the longer you play it. That's what I was thinking too. But after beating all 3 stories and getting to the last episode, I realised that, no, the game is still trash, Silver being good was just a complete fluke. The last episode highlights everything that's wrong with this game. The final level is called End of the World, and it certainly fucking feels like it. In this finale, you play as 7 out of the 9 playable characters. Tails, Knuckles, Shadow, Rouge, Omega, Silver, and Amy. On 7 out of the 9 stages. You don't play as Sonic and Blaze because they're both dead, I'll get to that in a minute. In quick succession, you're forced to suffer through using terrible playable characters, excluding Shadow and Silver, and going through brief segments of the same levels you played at least 3 times to get to this point. But this time, they're littered with these space-time rifts that suck you in and kill you instantly if you touch them. Fuck this part of the game. It is legitimately painful and a blatant demonstration of the biggest mistakes this game made. There are 9 playable characters, and most of them are awful. Instead of making 9 playable characters and chucking in all these vehicles and gimmicks and side missions, why not just focus on making Sonic, the main character, good? If you can't get Sonic's gameplay right, what in the fuck makes you think you can do better with 8 additional characters? If you're going to insist on having multiple playable characters, then at least just limit it to Sonic, Shadow and Silver and focus on making them good. You don't need the other 6. It's not like their time was taken up by making a bunch of levels, because they only made 9 and reused them 4 times. What a stupid decision. The final boss was also not worth the effort it took to get here. It was boring, easy and a waste of time, and it makes me wish Sonic stayed dead. Which brings me onto the game's story that I've just been dying to tear apart. It is genuinely a terrible story. The setup is good, the whole concept of the story is decent, but beyond the beginning it's just bad. Basically what happens is there's an experiment in Soliana that goes wrong and releases Mephiles and Iblis, who are the 2 halves of Solaris, a being who seeks to destroy time. Or something. This causes the future to be a devastated fiery wasteland where there is no hope. It's also where Silver and Blaze come from. The whole story boils down to Mephiles trying to combine himself with Iblis, who is sealed within Princess Elise, and the trio of hedgehogs attempt to stop him. This story is a disaster, so much so that I don't even know where to start. I guess I'll just start with Princess Elise. Her whole thing is getting kidnapped by Eggman. It happens, count them, 5 separate times, and each time Sonic rescues her, nothing comes of it. She literally only exists so that... Actually, I don't even know why she exists. I guess because Iblis is sealed within her, and the only way to release Iblis is to get her to cry, and she's also supposed to be a love interest, but she and Sonic have absolutely no chemistry whatsoever. She's just dead weight, basically. Blaze also dies at the end of Silver's story because she absorbed Iblis to seal it away. But when Elise does the same thing as the little girl, she survives? How does that make sense? It's total bullshit. And then you have all this time travel going on. It's a garbled mess of time travel and crossing timelines and time loops. It's chaos. And the finale just seals the deal on what a disaster this story is. So Sonic fucking dies. Mephiles just offs him like it's nothing, which causes Elise to cry, and that releases Iblis, who fuses with Mephiles to create Solaris. So why exactly did Blaze sacrifice herself if Iblis was released anyway? It just doesn't make any sense. Anyway, to revive Sonic, the furries gather the Chaos Emeralds which they've had for the whole game, but suddenly don't anymore, and that's when it happens. The infamous moment. The kiss. They didn't need to do this. It's uncomfortable to watch. They could have just left it at using the power of friendship, but no, they needed to make it the power of bestiality to revive Sonic. And it's not just bestiality, Sonic is also dead at the scene of the crime. So it's bestiality and necrophilia. Elise should be in prison. Anyway, Sonic is revived and he teams up with Shadow and Silver to beat Solaris. Cool, that's great, whatever. They could have just left it there, but instead they added another layer. They made Elise blow out Solaris' original flame, destroying it and thus preventing the events of Sonic 06 from ever taking place. So it never even happened. I just don't understand. This plot is an absolute train wreck. We go through all that just for it to have never occurred in the first place? The plot from the Sonic 06 real-time fan dub makes more sense than the actual plot of this game. Which brings me to the conclusion. You know what this game feels like? A fan game. Everything about it is dodgy in the same way a fan game would be. The controls and physics are off, the story is terrible, and Elise definitely feels like some sort of self-insert character. Everything is so cheap. There are too many ideas like extra playable characters and vehicles, almost none of which are executed well. Aside from a few flukes like Silver's gameplay, it's bad, and extremely bad from a company like Sega. But the fact that it's so bad is what makes it so good. It's hilarious, and in a way, endearing. It's just funny and enjoyable seeing all the different ways this game fails to deliver a decent experience. There are so many times where I was just chuckling to myself while playing the game, and that made it somewhat enjoyable. Every time the physics caused the game to freak out, every time something was cheaply animated, every time I heard a botched voice line, you can't help but take delight in its incompetence. It doesn't excuse the game for its crimes, and I'm not exactly happy that I paid money for this, but it's a silver lining. And hey, at least it gives you a greater appreciation for the Sonic games that are actually good. So in short, if you're thinking of playing this game, you're welcome to, but I'd personally recommend you do something else.